Mr. Birding and members of the board, we do have several items for board discussion this evening. Our first item is administrative handbook revisions, and we'll have multiple individuals speaking to those revisions this evening. But at this time, I'll turn it over to Mrs. Katie Myers.
Good evening. All right, so I am here to introduce the Administrative Employee Handbook. We have found that this manual that we give to all of our administrators when they're newly hired has not been updated since 1998. So it's been quite a while, and we found that we need to update this. A lot of general language is outdated in the document, so that was kind of one of the big pieces when we dove into the project, but we have found a lot more as we've gone through it. So first, we're starting out to review this entire handbook. Again, going over the general language, a lot of examples, medical and dental insurance, all of that was outdated on what the board offers for the employees versus what they are responsible for. Providers listed in there, we want to make that more generic, so if we ever change in the future. And we want to gear it more toward aligning with the Fairfield Classroom Teachers Association, to where that language is pretty much aligned in the same fashion to what we have for our teachers and our administrators. So also with this updated, the revisions to the handbook, it's going to include better guidelines for these administrators to follow. I think as the years have gone by, they haven't really known that there is a handbook for them. And part of that, it's outdated, so it doesn't include all the information that the teachers' master agreement they would include. So the teacher's agreement has a bunch of appendices, so all their leave forms, sick leave, personal leave, professional leave, tuition reimbursement. Administrators don't have any of that in their manual, and so we are telling them to go just fill out the forms that are in the teacher's contract, which doesn't make any sense. That's not theirs. So that's another piece that we're adding to this handbook, or are there appendices for their specific forms to fill out. Some other, also in 1998, when this was last revised, there was no such thing as support staff administrators. So this only speaks to certified professional administrators. So we wanted to include, or classified now support staff, we want to include language for them to be in this as well. Nancy will speak a little bit to that on her items and how we want to incorporate and align everything in that sense. Another piece, the evaluation. So I presented to you last month the new, the draft of the administrator evaluation for non-principals. So just like the Fairfield teachers contract, they have all the copies of their OTES documents in that. We want to include OPES for the principals that are part of this handbook, as well as the new draft that I gave you for non-principals. So they can reference everything in this manual and they know what to look for the evaluation. So that's another appendix that we will add to this handbook. And that's kind of the general outline of what we're trying to do with this. Roger, Nancy, and Billy will speak to some specifics that we want to add or that we're recommending for it. So right now I want this to be a discussion as our plan to recommend this, and then I want to bring it back. I will be sending this out to you, the whole board, with the actual draft so you can review it and see what changes were made and bring it back for approval. Any questions overall for what?
And when would that, you'd ask us for approval when?
The May 16th meeting.
Okay.
And we want this to be effective July 1st for the new contracts.
So Katie would send that to you electronically prior to the next meeting, and we've talked about sooner that she's able to get that to the board, the better. We just wanted to give you just kind of an overall big picture this evening, have some discussion, kind of let you know what areas of the handbook we would like to change, and give you an opportunity to give us any feedback before we make those official revisions.
Okay.
Do you want me to stay up here for any questions while you guys speak?
No,
Just in
you're
case?
fine. No,
Okay.
if they don't have any questions, you're fine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'll go first. One of the additions that we would like to make to the administrative handbook is a competitive salary adjustment. So that language, this would be new language for the handbook. Right now, the superintendent has the authority to award raises anywhere from 0 to 5% a year for administrators. This new language would allow the superintendent to award an administrator a competitive salary adjustment of up to $1,500 per year. This would be given at the discretion of the superintendent and only would be awarded if the superintendent deems it necessary to ensure that that particular administrator's salary is competitive. In the last several years, we have made it one of our goals to become more competitive, not just with our teachers, but also our administrators and our support staff. So this is an example of doing something that would help us to recruit, hire, and especially in this particular case, retain some administrators. Some examples would be some administrators, if they were to look at the teacher salary schedule, they might see, we do have some cases, more than one, I believe, where an administrator could go back into the classroom, work fewer days, and have a significant salary increase. And so that is something that we would like to address. This one piece is just one small piece that would give us an opportunity to make a difference there. Again, we'd also like to avoid those situations where, we are able to hire a qualified individual to be an administrator. That particular person does a really nice job for us for several years, and then we lose that person. And those are the ones that are really tough because we feel as though we've invested in that person, time and money, and kind of trained them to understand the Fairfield way, and then we lose them because they're able to go get the exact same job for a higher salary. We certainly understand there are always circumstances where someone is able to get a promotion in another district, but it can be frustrating, like I said, when we put that time and money into someone and we lose them to a neighboring district and they go to this, a similar or same exact position. So again, just having the ability, it's a pretty small amount, but over time, if we identify certain individuals that we believe for one reason or another their salary is not competitive, just would be nice to have that flexibility to make a little impact. And for some individuals, that may be a one-time thing. It may be 2 or 3 years. We've often said that this is an issue that we cannot fix overnight, but we've been chipping away at it. And I do believe that we have gained significant ground, and we've experienced that even this year in some of our processes that we've gone through as we have hired some outstanding individuals. So that's just one small piece that will be in that, some new language that we are proposing under compensation or salary in the administrative handbook. Be happy to answer any questions that you have on that particular piece at this time, or we can circle back at the end. Okay?
So this would be just, say, a one-time addition of $1,000 to their current salary?
It could be 1,000, it could be 500, it could be up to 1,500. It could be a one-time thing for some. It could be a 2 or 3-time thing. It's very situational and individual. I don't see this as being the norm. Again, that's why we chose that language, the competitive salary adjustment. This is not for people or for administrators who've done an outstanding, who've had an outstanding year or, or performed at a very high level. This is specifically for individuals that we've identified that we feel like there's a need for an adjustment because their salary just for one reason or another may not be competitive. a prime example. We've seen this over and over when an assistant principal gets in, or when a teacher that doesn't have a lot of years of experience gets into administration. Those are the prime candidates who lose ground over time, a certain number of years. Eventually, it's very common for them to get to a point and say, wait a minute, how did this happen? I could go back into the classroom and work 20 less days, 25 less days, and have a salary increase. And those are the kinds of things we're trying to avoid.
So you might recommend somebody for, say, $1,000, and that would be contingent upon board approval?
No. This is similar to authorize, the superintendent has the authority to issue raises anywhere from 0 to 5%. This would fall under that same category.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, this time I'll turn it over to Mr. Martin.
All right. This goes along with what Mr. Smith was just talking about. In your packet tonight, there is an administrative salary range sheet. This will become one of the appendices of our revised manual. We usually update this every year or two. We think with the suggestions we're making on this, at this point, that this should be good for the next several years, 2-3 years or more. The salary amounts are expanding, once again, to make our salaries competitive with other salaries nearby. And so we're changing the ranges, the upper limits of the ranges under the certified administrators, all 3 ranges, and under the classified administrators, under the first 2 ranges. There are a couple other changes happening to this. One is we're changing the terminology so that it is consistent with everything else in our district. Certified is becoming professional, and classified is becoming support. So we're changing to that terminology. And the only other real change on this is you'll see under range 2, under the new support administrators, we give the work days there, and typically under this range, the work days were either 218 or 228. But there is one position that falls under there that the person had requested fewer days, and we felt that the job could be done in fewer days. And so we're adding another amount of work days, 203, to that section as well. Those are the changes that we're suggesting under the administrative salary ranges. Are there any questions about that this evening?
Any questions for Mr. Martin?
Thank you.
I will speak to, as Katie said, some of the more detailed sections of the handbook. So retirement that is paid by the employees, typically, if you're, a professional administrator, is 14%, the employee portion. If you're a support administrator, it's 10%, because they're in 2 different retirement systems. The board presently pays 6%, pays 6% of that employee contribution as a fringe benefit for all of our administrators. After doing some research, gathering that information, we have found that we are not competitive at the 6% level. So we are requesting that that be changed from 6% to 8% for our employees. So that basically increases their take-home pay, but not their base salary. So that would be an additional 2% that the board would then pay for all of those administrators. And again, that is part of the package that's offered in many of the other school districts, surrounding school districts, some of which we've lost some of our administrators to in recent years. So I think that will help hopefully retain some of the current employees that we have. Second item I have is sick leave. So there's a disparity between the professional and the support administrators. Currently, our professional administrators receive 360 days maximum. They have to build that up over many, many years. Our our support administrators are limited to 330 days. So we're going to ask that we make that 360 for all of our administrators, not just our professionals. Same thing happens with severance pay. As it stands right now, our professional administrators receive 130 days maximum. We're asking that our support administrators also receive 130. They're at 120 as it stands right now. Tuition reimbursement, again, there's another disparity there. We allow 9 hours for our professional staff and only 6 for our support staff. So that's another item that we would like to move everybody to make everybody at 9 hours for tuition reimbursement eligibility every year. So those are the ones that are probably the most impact in the handbook, besides the salary piece, that we're looking to change and make it equitable between both our professional and our support administrators. Is there any questions on those items?
I would like
We
to
have a
add-
lot of administrators take advantage of the tuition reimbursement.
Professional members more than support, yes.
I would like to just add a brief comment on the additional 2%. You probably remember several years ago, we moved that from 4% to 6%, and we shared at the time that we'd like to eventually get that up to 8%. That really makes an impact for the recruiting part on the front end, because that is often when the individuals that we are interviewing will, if they have another offer, you know, it's common for them to be at least at 8% from our competitors. So it really helps us on the front end of that process to say, well, we also are at 8%. I mean, there's some that are above it, maybe a few below it, not many. 8%'s a pretty good number. So I just wanted to share that little extra bit of information.
Any questions? Okay.
All right, thank you. Our next item for board discussion is school fees. And I'll turn it over to Ms. Poskett.
Tricky. Thank you. Good evening again. I have the honor to talk about our school fees, and I will go in order of our elementary all the way up through our academy in regarding our school fees. But prior to that, I just want to draw your attention to the colors that I utilize for your ease in reading the school fees. When you see a red highlighted portion, which you would see in our middle school and also our high school, that would show a fee increase. Green highlighted would show a fee decrease, and a blue highlight would indicate a new course offering in which that course would have a fee attached to it. So when we're going through, you will notice that there's not many highlights, which is actually pretty remarkable. It's really great that our curriculum department and our principals work together in regards to really trying to minimize the amount that our families pay. As you know, we have a great deal of families, about 43% of our families who are on free and reduced lunch. And so because of that, we want to make sure that the education is accessible to all at all times. So going through with our elementary schools, the fees from the 18-19 school year are the exact same as the proposed fees for the 19-20. We have a total of $40 in the kindergarten realm, and then $60 grades K, or grades 1 through 5. Moving into our middle school arena, and this is obviously both for Creekside and Crossroads, you'll notice that social studies in the 6th grade is a red highlight, and that is because previously our 6th grade social studies never had a fee attached to it. So the consumables that are utilized for our OWP strategies within social studies, any extra project-based assignment components that the social studies teachers may need, they have never been able to utilize the school fees. And so this year, it was a decision to ensure that those social studies teachers also had the fees. So that would be a $7 fee, which is comparable to the other fees at the middle school of the social studies. And then also in physical science in the 8th grade, you'll notice that there's a $15 fee increase. And I wanted to address that quickly, that our physical science is a high school course, and this is the year for our high school science courses to have a curriculum adoption. And so the physical science courses have done a curriculum adoption, and then they have itemized their fees that are needed for labs, any of the consumables. And so grades 8 physical science all the way through our high school has increased their fees to $30 based on the needs for the specific assignments that they're going to be utilizing. And then chorus on the back is another fee increase of $2, and that's simply because they are changing the workbook that they are utilizing. They are going to be using Music Alive for their students. Any questions on the middle school fees? Okay. For the 1920 school year for the freshmen in high school, you'll notice that AP Music Theory is a green highlight, which is exciting. They are going from $90 to $30.50, and that is because of a 6-year contract with workbooks that we're able to negotiate, so they are able to have those consumables at a much lower cost than what they've had in the past. Moving on to the second page, you'll see that we have 2 new courses within our foreign language, and this is because of the increase of students who would like to continue on in their years of their world language. So you'll notice that in Mandarin, we have level 4, which would be a new course in our honors realm, and that fee would be $5 for class project supplies. And then also American Sign Language has had another level increase, also at the honors level, and that would also be a $5 fee for those students as well. Remember, those are both new classes, therefore the fees have not been there because the classes didn't exist. Journalism 1 and Journalism 2 are kind of an interesting entity. Journalism 1 was a brainchild of our high school, which is a fantastic course, but they did not get in prior to the fees that were approved last year. So they did not have the fees of the $8 that they would need within their course. So it looks like it's increased, but it's just that they hadn't met that deadline last year for that $8. And then Journalism 2, because we had so many students who wanted to move forward from Journalism 1, that is also a new class that would have that fee of the $8 as well. And then, like I had mentioned on page 3, our physical science had gone through a new curriculum adoption, and they had indicated that they needed, in this grade level, the $30 for their consumables for their students. The next page, you may see a lot of red, and those are actually our Butler Tech courses that we do not control the fees of. And so that is working in conjunction with Butler Tech, and Butler Tech sets those fees for our students.
And so the game design and the web design, that went from 5 to 35, am I reading that correctly?
Correct,
Okay.
yes. And then for our academy, you'll notice that there are no fee changes for our academy as well. So their fees have remained consistent from 2017 all the way to the proposed fees of the 2019-2020 school year. Any questions?
Yes. What do you attribute to the fact that over a 4-year period, we've had very little increase in fees when we look in the rest of our budget and the rest of our personal budget, what do we still get for the same price 4 years ago? So was it low inflation, cooperative bidding, or competitive bidding, cooperative purchasing? What can you?
All of the above.
Yeah, absolutely. As Katie said, we have worked really hard to do bulk purchasing. Nancy shared that with me when I first came on board, that was just a desire of hers to have us examine those kind of things more. Were there any ways the 6 elementaries could purchase together, or any ways, just we could do more of that? So we have really investigated that and done as much of that as possible, to my knowledge at this point. Maybe we'll find more ways to continue to do that, and we have saved just anywhere from 40% to 70% on various items, from science supplies to novels to workbooks. As Katie said, we make purchases 6 years at a time when we do our adoptions. So when we say to a company, like, we need a really great deal because we're going to buy 6 years worth right now, and I'll pay you for 6 years. If you do it right now, you would be shocked the number they start with when they sit a quote in front of me to the number I end up paying, which is really exciting, and so it makes me feel pretty proud. I run down to Nancy each time that happens and say, look, and sometimes she gives me a gold star. So other days, just a pat on the back, and that's that. But the other things, when it specifically comes to fees from that end of things, as Katie said, our department, along with the principals, have really taken the stance of, right now, we just looked it up. Just a couple days ago, we received our latest count that 43% of our students are on free and reduced lunch. That's a fact in our district today. And so recognizing that, our families don't need to be paying more fees. They just don't. So whatever we can do from our general fund, like we were saying, cooperative purchasing, and trying to take care of trying to take care of our students' needs that way, as opposed to through fees. That's the philosophy we've tried to take. We recognize that sometimes that's not. I mean, fees are a part of school business from that end of things, and they are a valid way to increase our income, and they're used for things that genuinely kids are going to take home. When they're taking home their workbooks, when they're taking home items of that nature, we're going to utilize student fees. But we do have to recognize that there's a hunk of our students that aren't going to pay those, and the general fund is going to cover that anyway. So, as I said, the principals have been great about that too, that unless we very specifically have a reason, a new course, a workbook increase, we have kept the typical consumable cost of colored pencils, Post-its, colored paper. We have limited that. We have not raised that cost. We have covered it in other ways. And in working with Nancy, my budget has held firm for the last several years, and what I do is I allot like a certain amount to each one of my department members, like they kind of know they're in charge of that amount, and as they are out and about in buildings, they also, if they're in Mr. Martin's classroom and he says, gosh, I just wish I had more index cards for whatever, well then they'll say, you know what, I'm going to go get you some index cards. So that way it's not a stress on the building about, so again, we try to take care of it differently than passing it off to our families.
Good.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
Our next item for board discussion, board policies, and at this time, I'll turn it over to Mr. Matt.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Mr. Birding, members of the board, there are 7 policies for discussion tonight. I'll cover them briefly, take questions at the end there. Policy JECBB covers inter-district open enrollment. The biggest update in this particular policy is a requirement that if we make a change to the policy, we have to report that to ODE within 30 days. And there is also a report that we'll fill out to let ODE know that we are in compliance with this particular policy on an annual basis. Policy JECBD is intra-district open enrollment. And just a quick note, inter versus intra. Inter, the policy just discussed, was a student who comes in from the school district from another school district. Intra is students who attend one of our elementary schools or one of our middle schools and would like to attend a different middle school or different elementary school. So that policy governs that. Again, we must report any changes to ODE within 30 days and report on an annual basis our compliance with those 2 policies. Policy JED, student absences and excuses. We've added some updates for reasons for excuses, including foster care and homelessness. And we've also included language that says we need to notify students or parents of a student absence within 120 minutes of the school day. We were really doing that all along through One Call Now. Our system automatically updates, but we are uniform across the district to make sure that those calls do go out before 120 minutes of the school day. Policy JFCJ, weapons in the school, gives guidance on how to address dangerous weapons in the school, like guns, knives, and bomb threats. That's really just a general update from OSBA, not a lot of content change within that policy. Policy JGD, student suspension. There is a new House Bill 318. It states you are only allowed to suspend students in pre-K to 3 for reasons that would jeopardize student health and safety of the student. So you can't suspend a student pre-K to 3 for not following directions. Truthfully, we probably only suspended our pre-K to 3 students for those reasons anyway. But it also states in this House bill that we need to also consult with behavioral therapy or behaviorist to be able to provide any mental health counseling that may be required for students that you're considering suspension for in pre-K to 3. Policy JGDA is emergency removal of a student. By law, principals and teachers can remove a student from their classroom. They can remove a student from a building if needed. And they can do that without an official hearing for an emergency situation. And we previously had 72 hours by law. We could remove a student up to 3 days without a formal hearing. The new legislation states that we have 24 hours for students, that we must provide a hearing when we emergency remove a student within 24 hours. Policy JGE, student expulsion, very similar to the student suspension change, consulting with mental health counselors in the event that we are recommending expulsion, just as we would for the suspensions. And again, you can only recommend expulsion for a pre-K to 3 student for those safety reasons. Those are the policies for discussion tonight. Will probably be on the next board agenda for approval. Any questions?
Any questions or comments?
I had a
Yes.
question.
Go ahead.
Thank you. The change to the 24 hours instead of the 72 hours, that's based on what the state deems necessary, or?
Yeah, that's not a local decision. That's a requirement by law.
Logistically, does that give you enough time to investigate, do what you have to do to have a hearing the very next day?
Well, typically, I mean, we very rarely remove the student for 2 or 3 days without some sort of due process. There could be situations where we're a little bit more pressed to make a decision, and that's ultimately what it is. You know, we may have a suspicion that a student was involved in something inappropriate that causes a danger or concern to, that we have. We're within 24 hours going to be required to meet with that student, allow them, kind of present them with the information and the belief that we feel that they committed this act. Within 24 hours, we're going to need to have that meeting, that due process hearing with them, and then make a decision at that point, do we move to suspend or not? So it may jeopardize a student. We may be a little quicker to suspend, but I would bet in almost all cases, we are making that decision within a 24-hour period. It's very rare that we would keep a student on an emergency removal without that hearing now more than 24 hours. I think most principals operate under the assumption that it is 24 hours, but it has been 3 days.
If I might add, the majority of these are students who one day may be having a really bad day and they melt down, and they're able to come back the next day and be in class. The crisis is over, so they're just having emergency removal for that day, and the next day, generally, they're fine to be back in school instead of being out longer, so that they would miss academic teaching.
So if we had an incident on Friday at noon, we'd have to have the hearing by Saturday at noon?
Yeah. And to give you an example, we have infractions that can happen on the weekend. What we'll do is we'll call, we'll do investigations over the weekend and call the parents and let them know, you need to bring your child in. They're not to ride the school bus, bring them in for that hearing. So we have that communication now before that 24-hour window. But as Mr. Martin stated, it really does refer to those, for lack of better words, when I was sent to the principal as a child by the teacher, that's quote an emergency removal. So if I'm sitting down there for a couple of hours, that's okay. If it's, I can't sit down there for days at a time without some sort of meeting with me to go over why I'm in the principal's office. That typically is what this policy is covering.
So if I could just ask a clarifying question. So Mr. Hare's talking about, you know, when you say hearing, are you talking about a formal hearing? You know, it's not common for us to have, you know, hearings, you know, like we think of them as a, you know, with the, you know, over the weekend type thing. So, but it is common, like we communicate with parents and talk about what our plans are. We do that on the weekends, but we don't necessarily have official hearings over the course of a weekend. I did want to clarify that we are in communication with parents and talk to them about a process and even say, you know, Monday, we would like for you to bring your child to school, you know, first thing in the morning so that we can talk about this, and that's when due process comes into play. You know, generally. And sometimes due process can come into play over the weekend via telephone too. But I just wanted to clarify, you know, due process, you know, sharing student rights and whatnot, not necessarily a recorded hearing type thing on the weekend. So I just wanted to make that clarification. Does that sound?
If I could.
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
Yeah.
If I could add as well, the language actually says the next school day. So it wouldn't have to be on Saturday. The hearing would be the next school day, so it would be Monday.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Mr. Chair, I think I misunderstood it, that was a question. That, yeah, it's clarified now.
Mr. Shore?
Yes, thank you. I'm looking at policy JECBB, interdistrict open enrollment. There's been some changes to the policy that I would like for you to give me some more information on. I'm looking at the back, and it does state that, or it shows that applications must be submitted for renewal each school year in the specified time frame. So that language has been eliminated. I think that is language that's important. You know, we haven't really looked at open enrollment in a while. You know, I think there's great things about the program, but I guess my concern would be if you eliminate that language, and I don't see anything on the policy that actually would force some kind of review. So if you have a situation where there is an issue, I think that would be captured within that renewal application. So if you have a student that has not matriculated well here and open enrollment is not working for them, if you don't have this application renewal process and it's just, you know, open-ended, where do we pick that up? Because I think it's important, and if we see problems, we need to have the ability to decide whether or not that student comes back through open enrollment. And I'm just afraid that with that elimination, you will not have that. So this is very important, and I would like to understand why that requirement has been eliminated.
Absolutely, and we can certainly put it back in there in the policy. The first part of the policy states that there's administrative regulations to making sure that those are met. So we haven't changed, I'm not making any changes at this point to our administrative regulations. The only change is the policy. So that's that statement, that those guidelines are in our regulation. So we can add it back into the policy before it's approved, but it is going to be and remain in our regulation. That really, there's a multi-page policy or regulation that doesn't get board approved. It's administratively reviewed and updated as needed, but that will remain in that regulation. In fact, if you look at number 3, the wording in that where it talks about capacities and educational programs, that wording has been eliminated. Again, what I've noticed through OSBE updates, they are trying to wordsmith policies that reduce words and include things that are meatier and more lengthy into regulations. So that language on number 3 and the one you just pointed out will still remain into our regulation. But if that is something to consider, we can certainly put that into the policy and just reiterate it in both places.
I tell you, I would be much more comfortable seeing it in the policy.
I agree with that. I prefer to keep it in the policy. The line about applications supposed to be submitted for renewal each school year.
Yeah, that's no problem whatsoever.
Just to be clear, though, and that's perfectly fine, we, as a district, we are not changing our procedure, so they will be, individuals will have to continue to apply every year per the regulation, go through the exact same process they've been going through. I just wanted to make that clarification that, correct, Mr. Madden, we're not
That-
changing any of our
absolutely.
policies or,
Yeah.
I'm sorry, any of our procedures. But it's certainly, that's up to board discretion with that. But I did want to clarify that we have no intention of changing how we've been doing that, because
So-
I agree with you.
Right, and I think that this is a public, it's a public, documented public face. This is something that a parent would go to the website and see. So I think because the specifics of the procedure, that's not something they see. I think it would definitely be wise to keep it in our, general public policies here, so that parents know that we are not moving away from that, because I saw it and I was surprised. So I think, in my opinion, we should leave that language there.
I agree.
I think that would also make number 8 a little more significant on the first
Yes.
page. Because if you're applying for renewal and it speaks to the previous semester's behavior. So that helps, I think, make that a little more forceful.
Okay.
Yeah, and we will definitely put that back in there. What I noticed with OSBA, like I look at number 8, sometimes they still word straight from Ohio Revised Code, and that is where they're modeling their policies from. And I see that the 1 through 8 or 1 through 9, that I think they're literally copying and pasting Ohio Revised Code and putting in the policy. But we will certainly put that line back in there to hit home that deadlines are important. And as a person who takes a lot of phone calls for people who don't meet deadlines, it's important, because we do enforce those deadlines pretty strictly with all of our parents if they don't meet them.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Mrs. Short.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right, our next
I'm
item.
sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I was thinking about what Mrs. Short had to say, and I forgot to add my comments. Because I thought what you added was very important, so it distracted me. There was just a couple items on this housekeeping items on JED, where there were numbers, but it wasn't also spelled out, and we kind of gone to that in our policies. So if you wouldn't mind just looking at that, there's, talks about 120 minutes, age of 14 years, and there was one other spot, 18 school hours. We've been spelling out the word of the number as well as including the number. It would just mind, just a
Absolutely.
housekeeping item.
Yep.
Great, thank you. I'm sorry, Mr. Smith.
That's okay. Next, we have additional 33% freshman school, senior high American Sign Language teacher. I'll turn it over to Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. We have a need at our freshman building. Our changes in world languages recently have really been well received. Our Mandarin classes, you noticed when Mrs. Post-Fishel spoke that we were adding a fourth section of that, or a fourth year of that. The same thing is happening with American Sign Language. American Sign Language is so popular, we already have 1 2/3 teacher. We have enough students to fill that person and make them full-time. And so our recommendation to the board would be that we would be permitted to go ahead with American Sign Language and be able to bring that person, that's 67%, on full-time. They're already receiving benefits and everything at 67%. So bring them full-time so the other two classes can receive American Sign Language this next year. And I would just look for some thought of approval. I know it'll come back when we actually have the person's contract for you to consider, but if you would like for us to move ahead with that, if you would just let us know, that would be awesome.
I'm okay with that.
Sure, yes.
Okay, thank you. They'll be very pleased with that.
Thank you, Mr. Blunt. All right, our next three items will be covered by Mr. Penny. I'll turn it over to Mr. Penny at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, Mr. Birdie, members of the board. I have three items for discussion this evening. The first will be based on roof replacement, repairs at high school and east. At the high school, we are planning to replace a few areas where the roof is failing and do preventive maintenance and repairs. We're focusing this year, we're all over the place where we need basic repairs in PM. We're doing the basic repairs, but we're focused heavily at the high school and at east. Those buildings are our second oldest generation buildings, I'll call them, compared to our brand new ones. And with our facility assessment that's coming up, we want to make sure that we can kind of blanket the whole district. With that being said, the high school and east, being at the age they are right now, around that 22-year-ish place, feel that it's time to go ahead and focus on some things there over the summer, because we know it's going to be pertinent that they are taken care of. So these, the failing roof and preventive maintenance repairs are going to be focused on replacing a failing roof between the PAC and community room, replacing a failing roof at the entrance of the high school, and doing preventive maintenance on sections of the metal roof. So the majority of the building's metal roof, which is great. That was a great decision at that time. They last for a very long time, but they do need a little bit of maintenance from time to time. At east, moving on to east, very similar as far as the roofing structure. We have rubber roof there as well as the steel roof, or metal roof. And we are planning to replace a failing portion of roof, ultimately above the boiler room. And then we're also going to do similar maintenance and roof repair at that building on sections of the metal. Is there any questions on the roofing portion?
I just have one question. I know you said the high school between the PAC and the community room. I know I've noticed at times buckets in like behind the stage area where there was,
Really?
so in the PA, more in the PAC. I mean,
Okay.
you know roofs, I don't, but
I
I
know
didn't know if
there's
that was
area-
included in that area.
Well, as far as the complete replacement tear-off, that area is not. But as far as looking at the roof and ensuring that we have repairs made such as those, yes, we'll look into doing that. One of the things that we're interested in doing as part of the assessment is having a scan done of the roofs, so that way we can see kind of like an x-ray vision type of thing of where the roofs are failing. You know, water's funny about how it works. It's sometimes come in at one spot and creep everywhere. Once that dampness is in the insulation, then at that point, something like a scan will be able to help us pick up where the target areas will be. So I'll make sure I note that. We have a long list of different areas around that we're doing some minor repairs. So, thank you. Are there any questions regarding the roofs?
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to brick restoration work at the high school. This kind of goes in conjunction with the entrance roof, which is failing. There are a few different areas around the high school where we have brick, lintels, things like that need repair, around gutters, things like that. This year, we're going to target a specific area, and we're going to see how the work turns out, and also within our assessment, and then formulate a plan for moving forward and how we're going to resolve these different issues. But one of the areas we would like to target at the high school this year is the entrance. And if walking the building, you may have looked up and noticed the looks of it aesthetically, it needs a major improvement, but also from a structural standpoint. Now, we're not concerned at this moment in regards to structural failure, but if we don't take care of the issue and start taking care of these things, then those are things that we'll end up seeing in the future, are structural failures. So replacing that section of roof at the entrance of the high school, as well as then, once everything's cured, taking care of that structural issue, are what we plan on doing at the high school. And then also at the high school, we have a lot of different downspouts that we need to take a look at. But this year, we're going to start with one, and we're going to go from there. So we're going to look at the downspout. We're also going to look at doing the structural repair around it that is necessary. And ultimately, what's happened is, because of downspout failure, water has been able to trickle down and around, and it's going on areas of the brick and deteriorating at a more expedited pace than we would like to see. And we'd like to see all this come through on our facility assessment to confirm our thoughts. But we know that we would like to give one area a shot, definitely, so we can see what it takes to resolve the issue, and then we'll know moving forward how we'll address it. Are there any questions regarding brick restoration at the high school?
Hearing none.
Okay. Moving on to number 3, kind of shifting gears a little bit here, athletic complex urgent necessity. We would like to expedite the construction for the restroom building and completion of the concession stand utility updates. That includes the water, the sewer that we talked about for concessions a few meetings ago, for the fields behind Creekside Middle School, so they will be available in time for fall athletics. There will be an item for board action on the agenda requesting approval to move forward through means of urgent necessity for this project. Ultimately, we would like to go ahead and expedite this, because it's not just about the spring sports that's going to impact next year, but we also have some fall activities going down there. And then also, it's going to allow us most likely to be able to complete our paving project in this end of the year instead of coming back in the spring. So for the actual walking path and things that will connect with this facility. So we're highly interested in going ahead and moving forward with this through urgent necessity. I'll go ahead and open that up to discussion.
Questions or comments about?
What had we decided there in terms of the options that we were given?
I think we,
What was the question?
the question was, what's the options? We had several different options about what we were going to build as far as the restroom facilities.
Storage and all those
Right.
things we talked about.
Yeah, so I'll defer to Joe, but I don't believe we decided to go with the option that had the storage. I think we kept it simple with the restrooms. They're on site, and then also we came back later and talked about adding water to our concession stands, but I'll let Joe clarify that.
Yes, through discussions, we discussed going with just the restroom. Now, the restroom has a small storage component on the back of it, but it's not the larger storage component that we discussed during the meetings. So that's ultimately what we talked about, I know, just through discussion. And then also the concession stands, and right now they do not have water because there wasn't sanitary sewer hookup to those, and the water lines were very old. So another thing that went along with this was going ahead and upgrading the utilities to those concession stands, so that way we could have the water available and make sure we had the sanitary sewer available for those. That would allow for student athletes to have ice out there, if we need an ice maker, and then also the operation of concession stands. So that's where I believe we left off.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the board, it's been a while, but the board reached consensus. I think Joe presented multiple options, and the board actually reached consensus on that quite some time ago with the which facility, the restrooms, the small storage. Initially, just to refresh everyone's memory, we talked about not moving forward with the water, but then after we gave that some additional thought, we talked about just trying to be consistent with our programs and our student athletes, how we just didn't feel right about some programs having to transport water jugs and ice from one facility to another versus having it on site. We talked about having ice for injuries, those kinds of things. And but again, that's been quite some time. last time we discussed it, we talked about, once the board reached consensus on one of those options, getting it ready for next spring. The difference now is we'd like to move forward and have that ready for this fall versus the following spring. And that's why Joe's bringing it this evening as an item for board action with urgent necessity.
The dollar amount on this for tonight was $230,000, is that correct?
That is correct.
That is less than the last time we discussed when it was 317, and I asked where in the forecast that would be allocated from. So I think that's where we were at.
Correct.
'Cause looking at my notes, we talked about water and sewage, ice machines for hydration, first aid, and concessions, et cetera. And then $317,000 was forecast for this fiscal year. And there had been a donation to the athletic fund for part of that, but the 230 number is certainly less than the number we talked about the last time, significantly less.
I believe that to be correct. Yeah, I'm not aware of any additional costs since the board reached consensus on an option. Is that accurate, Joe?
That's accurate. We went through multiple different solutions, so there's more expensive solutions available. But I think from a budgetary standpoint, that's the money that had been allocated for this sort
Or
of
within
projects.
budget.
Shorter?
I'm fine, it bothers me that I can't remember the details on that, but I'm sure it's in the notes somewhere. But, yeah, we were definitely at a consensus that we needed to move forward, so now we're just picking up the speed a little bit, which is okay for me.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Thank you, Mr. Penny.
All right. Our last item for board discussion is Board of Education vacancy, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Bergen.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Now that we are aware that Mr. Hare has a sale pending on his home, I thought it was important that we bring a public discussion about what our process would be once a closing date has been done and he closes on his house and his domicile is no longer in the Fairfield School District. So I asked Mr. Smith to put this on the agenda for tonight, just so we can have a public discussion about what the process should be to fill the vacancy. So it was very nice of Mr. Smith and Mrs. Lane to put together a packet for us about what we did the last time we had a vacancy. And so there was the process, there's a cover letter that states what the process should be. And actually, it should be this page here that is part of your packet. The process was the applicant would submit a letter to Mrs. Lane, or a application process, or application letter with the cover letter, actually the application that the OSBA provides, along with answering several questions. So I will open up to the floor to discuss the process that we had last time, and if there's any other changes, or any changes that need to be made to that process. Obviously, the dates will be different based on whenever Mr. Hare closes on his house and submits his resignation. Any comments or questions or discussion about the process that we had last time, if we should follow the same process?
I think following the same process is appropriate. I mean, it's worked for us, you know. I
Had to
think
do it a few times.
It has. We've done this a couple of times, a few times. Certainly going to miss Mr. Hare, and that's, that's really a difficulty that we're going to have to, get past and work through. But certainly in this process and filling the vacancy, this is something that I think has worked well before. I like the questions that they're going to have to give us answers to. And if it's not broke, don't fix it. It's my thought.
So once they submit the application, then they submit it all to Mrs. Lane, and then she distributes those to us, if I remember correctly. And then we come up with a list of 2 to 3 candidates based on their responses. And then we have an interview for them at a time of our next meeting after the resignation. It has to be within 30 days, but after 10 days. And then once we gather that information, then I would be happy to contact those people that are to be interviewed, to set up appointments for them to be interviewed before, usually it's the day of our meeting, but before the meeting, our next meeting. So if that's the process we want to follow, then we can instruct Mrs. Lane to then put that process together so that once we know the date of Mr. Hare's resignation, we will move forward with that.
Your clock would start ticking upon his resignation?
Yeah, once he submits the resignation, then the 30 days starts, but it's also, and the 10 days start, but then it's contingent on when our next meeting is. So it has to take place at our next regularly scheduled meeting, so, to my understanding of the law. Correct?
Yeah, next regularly scheduled meeting, more than 10 days.
More than 10 days from the date of the resignation.
Effective date. Just one clarification, Mr. Birding. It looked like the last time you started the interviews at 5, so that your meeting time would actually have to start at 5.
Okay.
You'd go into executive session, and we'd have to provide notice of the change in meeting time.
Okay.
Which is fine, the treasurer can do that.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Any other questions?
It's going to be difficult to fill his shoes.
Well, we won't be able to fill his shoes, we'll be able to fill his seat. His chair, to fill his chair. So.
I thought you were going to say something about his sock. I thought for sure that was coming next.
So is that good process? We'll be following the law by using this process?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much.